Hey everybody, so I'm here in the middle of a spring swap on my very individualized front suspension, and I want to take a little bit of time just to talk about the spring options you have for your aftermarket coilover kits. Now, just for reference, the front strut in here, for all intents and purposes, can be considered a Bilstein B14. It started off as a B14, and then I took the damper cartridge out, sent it to Fat Cat Motorsports for their retuning, and then for a long time I've been actually running these standard 8-inch coilover springs made by Hyperco on here, and the spring rates I've been using have been between 250 and 275 pounds per inch. Well, Bilstein supplies their own spring with their B14 and B16, the same spring, unless you get the B16 comforts. But anyhow, those springs, they're more similar to this yellow spring here in that the bottom inner diameter is 60 millimeters for their adjustable perch down there, and the top, well, that's sized the same inner diameter as the OE thrust bearing and top mount, so you can see that goes together like that. And in another video, when I first tested this concept, you could see that I used this adapter, which is made by Milway, that adapts the top mount, the OE top mount, to a 60 millimeter ID spring. And then, if you want to use a 2.5 or 65 millimeter ID standard coilover spring, there are plenty of these little plastic adapters that are sold very cheaply. But that said, why would you want to do one or another? Well, for 99% of my driving, the standard coilover spring works great, and these are very available, tons of catalogs, tons of people make them, and they're pretty cheap. Like, I think I've been paying around like $55, $60 a spring. And for 99% of my driving, it's been great. But that 1%, particularly when I've been doing some off-roading and I take a really sharp, short hit that really loads things up, well, I have actually been able to get this spring to coil bind. And what that is that's when it compresses all the way and the various coils are touching each other, so the spring physically can't compress anymore. And when that happens, like, effectively, you've bottomed out your suspension. I haven't bottomed out the damper, but I bottomed out the spring, and it feels like a loud, sharp clunk inside the car. Obviously not that great. Well, this yellow spring here, this is actually from KW, and the benefits of going with something like this versus standard coilover spring is you have a larger stroke range. Typically when the springs get larger in outer diameter, they have a little bit more stroke, and then also this is a 9-inch spring versus 8-inch, so once again that has more stroke. If I lowered my front more than I had already been doing so, I probably wouldn't have these issues, bottoming out on those 1% of hits, because then the bump stop would be engaged more. But since I like a kind of higher ride height as a good, daily driving medium, and also for a little bit of off-roading, this hasn't been cutting it. So I went and I got these style springs. And you may be saying, well, wait, you're getting a KW spring for a Bilstein B14 strut? And, absolutely, why not? The part fits. A lot of these aftermarket dampers or front struts, whether it be H&R, which is made by Bilstein, or KW, they use a very common format. Even Eibach and ZF Sachs ones does, where they use a 60 millimeter ID lower perch or spring, and then the top is made for the top mount. Now, when you get to much higher spring rates, like let's say the 400 pounds per inch and higher range, you don't have to worry so much about this bottoming out effect, because the springs are just so much stiffer that they're not going to travel as much. So using a standard coilover spring is totally fine there. But if you want a more balanced setup where you don't have to go to crazy high spring rates in the rear in order to maintain flat ride, you probably are going to be looking at something in the 200 to 300 pounds per inch range, and that's when something that has more travel is really going to be beneficial. Now, yesterday I was at Fat Cat Motorsports, and I brought along these springs from KW just for fun, and we threw them on the spring tester to see what their rated rate was. And KW is great because, unlike Bilstein, they're more than happy to say, here's the specs of the spring rate, and sure, we'll sell them to you separately. With Bilstein, they might tell you the spec, but they'll also say, oh no, the only way you're getting in any of our replacement springs is buying a whole new suspension kit, which is just silly. But anyhow, KW told me that this particular spring, which comes from their M4 convertible coilover kit range, so V1 through V3, this has a spring rate of 265 pounds. And well, when I threw both of these on the spring tester, the first one measured at 261.25 pounds per inch, and this one was 264.5 pounds per inch. So I got to give props to the KW for being so darn close to the spec, within 1.5% on both of them, because it's pretty common for aftermarket springs that don't have well-defined specs to be all over the place. So if you have a Eibach, Bilstein, H&R or KW front suspension, and you want to just try and swap springs with some other manufacturer, I wouldn't really hesitate too much to do so. And once again, KW is a great resource for getting replacement springs. I have known other owners, like with Bilstein kits, that for some reason or another their springs have broken, and they've just gone through so much trouble to try and source a replacement. Well, give KW a call.